Well, I'm delighted to have Bob Cesca and Tim Panella back on the show. Well, actually, Tim's here for the first time. What am I saying? So Bob's certainly here for the second time on the Yes Music podcast, and Mark is here as well. So let's go round. Hello, Bob.
Hi, how are you? How you doing, Kevin?
Very well, thank you. And welcome, Tim.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
And hello, Mark.
Hello, Kevin. How you doing?
Not too bad at all. Right then, well, we better get on with this because we've got some very interesting Yes-related things to find out from Bob and Tim today.
So, greetings, gentlemen. The last time we spoke to you, Bob, we found out about your work about with Yes, actually. But for anyone listening who hasn't heard that episode, could you just give us a very brief overview of your involvement with the band around the time of Magnification and the Symphonic Tour?
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. I'll make it as brief as possible, I promise. It's a very complicated story, but long story short, I ended up beginning to do some work in television animation with a guy named Jordan Burliant, and he and I had been pitching some shows around, and it eventually actually became an animated series on VH1, the show that Jordan and I were working on. And it turned out Jordan is also, or was at the time, Yes's management, or part of Yes's management. And so because of, my being a huge fan of Yes and Jordan working with Yes, we started talking about Yes quite a bit. And he, skipping ahead several steps here, he actually offered me the opportunity to not only work on some video elements for their concert tour that was going to coincide with Magnification, but also on the package design and everything else like that for the album. So I ended up just basically out of nowhere, because the band at the time wanted to go in a different direction with the cover art for Magnification, I think. And when I say the band, I think mostly John. And so, that kind of landed in my lap, and I started working on the cover elements and so on, and some of the video elements. And in that same process, we were working on this TV show, this animated TV show for VH1. And Jordan put it out there, hey, would you like Yes to do the theme song for the show? And I said, no, I don't. I hate you. No, I didn't say. I said, of course, I would love to have Yes do the theme song. And I might be skipping ahead too far here, but suffice to say, Yes did record the theme song, and that's kind of what brings us all together here today, or at least 50% of it, because we almost became, Tim and I became almost like a one-stop shop for all of the sort of ancillary Yes things, cover art, animation, music, remixes. And it was great fun because Tim and I had, known each other since college, and we were best friends, and we recorded albums that we did in college, demos and so on. And in that process, we were always talking about Yes. That was one of the many things that we had in common, and we would fantasize about one day working with Yes, and then you fast forward 10 years and suddenly there we are working with Yes. It's kind of an amazing thing, and Tim can certainly tell you more about that process. It was all at once wonderful and completely demoralizing at the same time. It was, I don't want to lick a gift horse in the mouth, but I mean, everything has its downsides, and there were some downsides there too, but mostly it was just an incredible opportunity to get to work with a group of our musical heroes, and in that process getting to know the band, or certain members of the band, on a first name ongoing basis, and it was an incredible experience.
Great. Okay, well, let's turn over to Tim then and hear about the story from your point of view. So we've heard a little bit there from Bob, but how did you meet Bob, and then how did you get involved in all this Yes stuff?
Well, Bob and I bonded over music in college. We lived together a couple of years, and as he said, a through line of a lot of our musical influence, our discussions, dorm room discussions, was around progressive rock, the creation of music, Yes specifically. And, we used to kind of play a game of 6 degrees of separation from Yes. Our musical backgrounds and what we grew up with was a little bit divergent, but we found that common connection, and we could tie in so-and-so produced this album and appeared on this album. And The members of Toto performed on John Anderson's solo album, and all these other things. So it was, this ongoing theme that we would discuss while listening to Yes Music. So it seems especially appropriate to be on the show now. The 20th anniversary, basically, of the inception of our working relationship with them back in the day. And, as Bob said, 10 years prior to that, we were going to the Union tour shows. So,
well, that's right. We talked about that last week, in fact. But tell us, Tim, just before we move on, how exactly did you get? Did Bob rope you into the Yes stuff, or were you working with him anyway, or what happened?
Well, I mean, Bob knew that I was, looking for a career in media development, specifically audio, music production. And when he started his company, I was amongst the first people that he contacted to get involved with creating soundtracks for cartoons and stuff. And and then this Yes project happened, and 2001 was an interesting time for us and for the Camp Chaos company, that we had just, gotten into this television deal, and then suddenly we were connected to musical idols, and the theme song came about. And I'm actually going to take a step back from where Bob started the story about the theme song. Was Bob had actually asked me to produce a track that would evoke the style that we were looking for that show. Something proggy and high energy and things like that. And I actually did find a recording in my archives of an MP3 of that demo, which I'm going to post to my SoundCloud because it's very yesy, although it's a rough demo.
Right.
And it was intended to be an inspiration. Like, here's kind of the energy that we're going with. And then when they kind of went their own direction with it, and Bob can pick up the story there of, hearing the track that they produced for the first time, and kind of where we took it from there.
Well, shall we go back to Bob then? Do you want to take the story on a little bit from there about conversations with the band? And
it's an interesting story, and in fact, I have a video of the entire event. In fact, some of the video that I took of the band in studio in Santa Barbara in 2001, I think, recording Magnification. Some of that video made its way onto one of the bonus feature videos in the Yes Symphonic DVD.
Yes.
So you can kind of see some of that right initially. The really grainy looking video footage at the beginning was just me with a handy cam, not having any purpose for it. But that was the band at the time, and that was the trip that Tim is talking about. So just backing up just real quick, in the process of looking at a theme song and talking about a theme song, we were in the process of making the pilot for the TV show. And I went out to LA to do a little bit with the TV show, dealing with, MTV Networks, VH1. And then at the same time, Jordan and I were going to go up to Santa Barbara to meet with the band as they were recording Magnification, because they evidently had this theme song recorded already, which was kind of a surprise. And as Tim said, he wrote a demo, wrote and recorded it. And it was, as he said, really, really kind of a prog-oriented, upbeat, energetic, because we kind of knew what the network would and wouldn't accept. And with anything, you're dealing with a major studio like that, or a major network, they're going to kind of micromanage everything. And they micromanaged everything on that show. It was always a struggle. And I'm not singling us out. Certainly every show that gets produced, every movie that gets produced, there's always creative differences between the creators of the project and the network or studio. And we were no different. So I knew going in what was to come, in terms of, whatever this is going to be, I'm going to have to massage the network to get them to accept it. And so I fly out to LA, and Jordan Burliant, Yes's manager, also the quote unquote executive producer of Magnification, we both drove up there, and of course, I'm blown away because I'm finally meeting Yes. And it was just a huge event in my life to get to meet these guys and to be in studio as they're recording an album. You know, in this process, I had a long conversation with Steve Howe. I put my little handy cam up on the side, turned it on, hit record,
Right.
and just pretended like it wasn't on. And so Steve and I were talking for a while, did the same with John. And in fact, the entire band came out and sat in the lobby, and we were all talking about Monty Python and things like that. And and then we go into the studio, and they're all standing there. We're all standing there, and they start playing this song, which you have a copy of, Kevin.
I do.
And I'm blown away initially, and I'm thinking, this is wonderful, and it's a great song, but at the same time, it's probably not going to get accepted by the network. And
Right.
it was strange because the band already recorded it. I mean, they had finished it. Tim Widener had finished mixing it, and so it was all ready to go. And I'm standing there in the control booth in the studio in Santa Barbara where they recorded Magnification with the band, and they're looking at me, and I'm trying to look at the speakers and trying not to make eye contact as every thought in the world is going through my head. And one of those thoughts is, as I said, this is great. I love this. I'm blown away. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I never thought this could ever happen to me. All at once going to, there's no way the network is going to accept this. Because it is. It's very kind of Yes of that period of time. It's got that it's almost a folksy kind of slow. It would be great for a children's cartoon. But this was not by any stretch a children's cartoon. This was something that was adult and obnoxious and obscene, and it was satirical and all the rest of it. Lots of politics and pop culture in there. And so there just was no matchup. And it was so deflating. It was so, for the whole rest of the trip, including the fact that I got to go have lunch with the band. We all went up the street to an outdoor cafe and had lunch. And I'm sitting there talking about veganism with Steve Howe. And in the back of my head, I'm going, I've got such a fight. I have such a fight against VH1 to get this song accepted as what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And it was so uncomfortable after all of that, after this big meeting with Yes and how fun that was. I'm driving home. We're driving back down to LA in Jordan's car, and there's just dead silence because I'm just, my head is in my hand and I'm going, how this is going to be such a battle to get this finally approved. And so finally I said to Jordan, I said, I'm going to be honest with you. This is a great song, and I'm so glad you jumped in with both feet and had the band record this before giving us a sense in terms of a demo or what direction they would go in. Do you mind if I hand off the stems or the elements of the song to Tim Panella, my music director at Camp Chaos? Do you mind if I hand off these elements to him and he can do like a kind of an extended 12-inch single of it, do a remix of the theme song? And in fact, the first theme song for the series incorporated, it wasn't the song that Yes recorded, but it contained elements of it. So Tim was able to take some of the elements of the song and repurpose it into something that was upbeat and more acceptable to the network. So that's what we did. So that was one of the many remixes that Tim had done with Yes at the time. And that kind of gave Jordan the idea, well, we're going to be doing this EP in advance of Magnification being released, something that we can sell during the tour. And it had, I think it had In the Presence Of on it, and it may have had also Don't Go on it. Yeah. And then the live version of Long Distance Runaround. And so that's when Jordan presented the idea, well, hey, we're thinking about doing some, like, I don't know what he called it, celebrity remixes or some kind of series of remixes of Long Distance Runaround. Do you guys want to take a stab at it? And that, I said, well, I volunteered Tim. I said, oh yeah, sure, Tim would be loved. Yeah, he would love to do it. Let's have it. Let's have the parts. And so that's, this is where we hand back to Tim, and that's how we get into the Long Distance Runaround remix that he put together.
So first of all, this Long Distance Runaround remix, I really love it. I think it's fantastic. It has some fantastic elements in it. There's some great mood to it. So tell us about what led you guys to creating the remix of Long Distance Runaround, and what happened to this actual version?
Yeah, I've been actually thinking about this track a lot because it's as I said, it's the 20th anniversary of this track, and it's very much still to me speaks of that era of the kind of music, not necessarily that Yes was producing, but the kind of music that selfishly I was into at the time. Although there was certainly influence that I wanted to incorporate from elements of Yes productions or Yes related productions that I really enjoyed at the time. So basically, they sent me the stems of the concert version of Long Distance Runaround that they had recorded with the orchestra. So the orchestral stems were on there. DI, bass, and guitar tracks were in there. The drums were very live sounding, as drums tend to be when you record them in a concert venue. And then John had done studio take of vocals over that track so that the vocals would be, perfect, John's perfect style. So it was very interesting to get that breakdown of the recording, and you could kind of even just roughly lay it all out in a timeline, and it sounded pretty good. But again, I was in my 30s. I'm pretty inexperienced. I'm 2 years into my full-time career as a music producer, and I have this classic track. And I will say, age and experience is a wonderful thing looking back on it, and I would probably do things much differently then. So I tried to incorporate as many elements from those stems as I could muster at the time, including some of the orchestral elements, to create an initial version of it. But I was not particularly satisfied with the way that the drums sounded on my setup. And so I started programming some new drums and working with resampling some of Alan White's kit and just, getting it dropped in and changing some things around, and created a very rough mix that was very much unlike what the final version ended up being. But it certainly nodded towards that in an intro and an outro section, with the interior of the song being very much made up of elements of those live recordings. And so at the conclusion of that, I submitted that to Jordan, was my point of contact, and sent it to him. And I'll have to say that, from a personal perspective, sending that recording off was one of I was the most honored and nerve-wracked at the same time. Because again, this is something you're trying to prove yourself in the industry. You're working with icons in the industry, and here you're kind of doing your own take on it. So you're like kind of putting it out there and like, hey guys, is this going to be good enough? And, I didn't get much feedback from the band, other than, Jordan's reply was that he played it for them, and specifically mentioned Chris Squire's feedback was something along the lines of, yeah, it's okay, but why don't you suggest that he take this all the way?
Right.
And so, so as when you have that kind of endorsement, now you're like, well, now there's no restrictions to it. I'm really going to take a chance with this. So I immediately say, well, I'm going to cut out those orchestral elements, because that's not where my strong suit is. And they're going to have live recordings with the orchestra. And they're going to have those studio recordings and things like that. So they've got that part covered. So I'll go, take it kind of, do a 180 on it and take it all the way.
After you got that kind of feedback, what happened next in the story then? How did you go about taking it all the way?
So I basically broke down the elements that I wanted to use. A lot of my background in recording was in sampling and kind of, moving things around in a timeline. So that seemed like the natural process for me. And because I'd had these kind of world music elements at the beginning and the end of the original track, I said, well, that's where, I'm going to go in that direction. and kind of make it, if you want to say it's kind of influenced by a nature documentary, maybe. It's got to have some epic elements in it. I wanted to have some sampling elements in it. So I clipped a sample from my favorite Yes track, Heart of the Sunrise, simply because he used the word distance in it. So there's a sample of the word distance at one point. And I manipulated the vocals in ways that were very much the style at the time. There's kind of a lo-fi element of a couple of John's lines.
Yes.
The guitar parts and the bass parts were just the sampled best takes, and then changed the tempo, the timeline, and kind of built it around this idea that we were going to be out in nature and there was going to be kind of these tribal elements. I think the drums were very much influenced by Bruford's electronic kit during the Union tour with these kind of like the Birthright drums. I kind of felt like I wanted that element in there.
So I have a few questions about this. So when I first heard this, the first thing that immediately came to me was that it sounded very much like something that I would hear at the top of like a video game, like a Myst video game. You know what I mean? Like it's a very adventurous out in the kind of, exploring this huge, kind of wildlife scenery kind of thing. It very much reminded me of that, or even it almost sounded like the rolling ending credits kind of music sometimes when I heard this stuff. It's really dreamy. The thing I found very interesting about this was that I hear a lot of fretless bass kind of elements in this. Now, obviously that's not anything Chris Squire did in this, or am I mistaken?
No, that is new elements that I added. So all of the synth parts, the ethnic percussion, there is samples of Squire's recording in there for the main riff from the song, and all of the other elements were newly produced for this track.
Yeah, because I found that the electronic drum stuff was fantastic. I mean, it definitely made me think back to ABWH and stuff like that with Bill Bruford and stuff like that. So I thought that was very a good thing to put into it. The guitar parts I thought were fantastic. I thought there could be maybe a little bit more guitar in it, but I understood where you were going with it as far as the feel and the vibe of the whole overall mix of it. I like the world music elements of it, like that kind of like wood xylophone kind of sound and stuff like that. It was really fantastic. I'm very curious because, like you said, that you sampled a bit of Chris's bass and stuff like that. What were their reactions overall to having heard maybe not as much of themselves in this? Did they mind that, or were they okay with that?
Well, I will have to be honest now. Before I even get to that, I want to thank you for bringing up the thing about the video game music influence and Myst specifically as something that I've been revisiting recently, because that's ultimately where my career path took me, into producing music for games. So if you heard that influence in there, then maybe I did my job. So I very much appreciate that feedback. And as a good segue into feedback, I actually never received any reaction from the band or management after that track was completed.
And neither did I. I didn't hear anything about it either, other than to know that they didn't want to use it. And in the end, after all of that, they didn't want to use the track itself. So I don't mean to get too far ahead of us here, but I ended up using it in the end credits of the sort of the B-roll footage that I put together for the Yes Symphonic DVD. So if you look at the Dreamtime documentary, the half-hour piece that's on the Yes Symphonic DVD, the end credits have Tim's Long Distance Runaround remix over it. So when you, Mark, when you mentioned end credits, that's exactly it. And we used it for that exact purpose in the end. And I always wished that they would have put it on there. Just speaking for myself, I don't mean to interject, Tim, but it was one of those things where it was almost from what I recall, it was almost aspirational. Like, I remember Tim and I having discussions, well, wouldn't it be great if Yes actually kind of went in this direction a little bit? And so I think that may have inspired a bit of the style of it. Sort of, as Yes fans, what we were wishing for, or kind of aspiring to, like, maybe this would be cool if they did something along these lines, if this was the new direction that they would take. And also, mentioning ABWH, that was one of the first things that brought Tim and I together as friends, was the fact that we bonded over ABWH, because that album had come out right before we met up in college, and it was the source of endless conversation, as most Yes fans end up going through. So there was certainly that element of that album in there too.
tell us then, Tim first and then Bob, these two pieces of music, what happened to them in the intervening 20 years between then and now?
Well,
Tim, you can go. You can go first.
You know, speaking of feedback, when the documentary, when that DVD made it out into the public, you know, and these were in the days before viral videos and stuff like that. And I remember getting a lot of good feedback from the Yahoo Yes Music group back in the day, and looking for that recording.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know, we were still under the thought that it might be released in some form. You know, there was kind of the hope that I remember at the time that there were different versions of the magnification disc with a bonus disc depending on which retailer you bought it from. So like there would be a different live track on it, tacked on at the end if you bought it from Best Buy or one of the other stores. And, you know, it was like, well, maybe it'll make it on to, you know, the Sam Goody exclusive or whatever at the time. You know, I was holding out hope that something would come of it. And I also, and maybe rather naively, thought at the time that, you know, as Bob said, you know, this was kind of a Yes fans idea of where we would like to see some things go. And there was talk about a Yes remix project. And, you know, it was kind of, to me, I was like, again, this is from a very naive perspective of a young producer that says, well, this is like my audition tape. I would love to get more stems from Yes and maybe of other classic tracks and rework those. Not even necessarily in the same stylistic fashion, but, you know, just kind of reimagine things from a different perspective to perpetuate the longevity of those tracks. And eventually, I know that Virgil Howe did a remix album of some Yes tracks. And I remember listening to it when it came out and thinking to myself, well, that's not really the style I would have gone for. But certainly the idea was there at the time that, you know, I would love to build this into some additional collaborations with the band on some of these, you know, some of these recordings.
Yeah, and it was, again, it was so disappointing to get to that point and get through all of that and have them ultimately not use the song. But you know, that's the way things go sometimes. But in terms of what happened to this music in the last 20 years, is just we ended up forgetting almost what had happened and what had gone on just through circumstance and events and other projects coming up and so on. And I had actually lost my copy of the Camp Chaos theme song. And by the way, that was the initial name of the TV show on VH1, Camp Chaos. I forgot to mention that.
Yes.
And that's why John Anderson is singing "I Don't Want to Go to Camp Chaos" on the song. And so because the show itself was such a struggle to get produced, we ended up doing technically 2 seasons, but more like a season and a half, so to speak. So that came and went, and the struggle became just keeping the show on the air, much less, you know, worrying about, you know, what music was going to appear as the theme song. So there were lots of distractions. As I said, I lost my copy of the Camp Chaos song that they had recorded. And Tim had been putting up his SoundCloud a couple of weeks ago, and we ended up talking about it, and he had it. He had the copy. And I said, oh my God, finally I have a copy back. Right. I've got to, now that we're 20 years on, since it was, I think, first recorded, I think 20 years this summer, I got to get this to Kevin and get this on the Yes Music podcast because no one had heard it before. It's one of the last recordings, one of the last Yes recordings with John on it. I mean, apart from Magnification, it was this, I mean, in terms of studio recordings, this song was one of those things. And it's a simple song. I think it's a minute and a half long, and it's got repeated lyrics, but I think it's something special. I think it's something that represents a very specific period of time for the band. And in some ways, unbeknownst to them, that this was going to be one of the last times they recorded with John Anderson. And, you know, you'll notice, too, some elements of Don't Go in there, where they were able to take some of the, there's some backing vocals in there, that kind of thing. And that ended up in the bridge, I believe, that middle 8 section of Don't Go. And I think I have video of Alan White describing how they repurposed some of the theme song into one of the songs on the album and back and forth. So you can, if you listen carefully, you can hear it. Plus, it's got some great Steve Howe acoustic work on there. You know, I think if they had actually expanded it and put a little more shoulder into it, I think it could have been a song. It could have been like a B-side to something, like the B-side of Don't Go or something along those lines, if they had made it a little longer and produced it a little more. But so it was a shame that it never got used, but it's interesting now to go back 20 years later and hear it and be able to appreciate it without the sort of the creative politics of the time that we were all dealing with, trying to get a show on the air, working with our musical heroes and so on, the band that we love so much, and having the ups and the downs. And there were some downs in there too. If you're working creatively with anybody, especially John Anderson, you're trying to find where your place is in the whole Yes mix. And there have been musicians who worked with Yes for many, many years who had that same problem. So I'm not singling us out as being anything special or different. We just were caught up in that John Anderson Yes tornado. And it was, looking back, I loved the fact that all happened. It was such a privilege, such a rare thing. And given, how Tim and I first connected as friends and as collaborators musically, it was, unmatched. I wouldn't change a thing.
Two questions, and then I promise that's the end for me. One is, since you did have contact within Yes management somehow because you were working with them, why didn't you ask them to do it? Number one, like to have a shot at doing it. And the other thing is, specifically to Tim, being a remix guy and an engineer and stuff like that, what are your views on the Steven Wilson remixes? What are your opinions on it? And would you have done things much differently?
Great question. I think that back at the time, I wouldn't have been so bold as to say, well, why don't you send me some more stuff? I think that, again, with age and experience today, I would probably be much more aggressive about that, but also more confident in my production abilities some 20 some years later. I think that I was discouraged at the time because I had gotten no feedback from the band, and what we had found out was that the track wasn't really going to be utilized anywhere. That I just kind of said, well, I guess that's that. I think that, to be fair, and when we talk about what happened to this music in the 20-year gap, Yes never hired me, and I was never compensated, via payment from the band for creating this remix. Yeah. Now, so I've had it on my SoundCloud. When people would contact me from the old Yahoo group asking about the song, I would send them an MP3 of it. So I've been able to play the song and be connected to the song without any interference from a label or from the band management or anything like that. I've never made a dime off of the song.
No cease and desist.
No cease and desist. But I've never monetized it. As far as the Camp Chaos theme song, that was a kind of a rediscovery and going through my archive of music, and I didn't even have a complete mix of it. So the version that you have is a mix that I did from the original stems. And as Bob said, it's kind of a raw recording. Although, John, again, did 8 passes of vocal takes on it to get that massive sound. So it's really a unique process. And, I feel like the backing track was kind of largely improvised. But again, it was fun to go back to it in retrospect and kind of hear it for what it was and as a reflection of that time. Now, to the second part of your question, the Steven Wilson remixes, I had just within the past week went back and listened to those tracks again, and so that it's an extremely apropos question that you should ask at that time, because I was actually reflecting on that of what I would do different. And I'm so familiar with the original recordings that there were some elements in some of the tracks that I felt like I wanted to hear more of that I don't hear in his mixes. And in some cases, they, I'll confess that I don't have golden ears. So, I can't always discern like what it is that he's done differently across the board with a lot of the things. I know that the recordings sound very good, and I appreciate that there are artists and technicians that can go back into these recordings and, refine them in a way that makes them all at once sound classic and modern. But yeah, I think that every engineer goes into a project and hears different things or wants different things emphasized, would bring things up. I think in modern recordings, drums tend to be really hot, and I enjoy that aspect of recordings, and I might make little tweaks here and there, but again, those recordings are so iconic that, to just load them up and start messing with faders would be tempting to bring things out. And I'm sure that there's a lot of subtleties in the recordings that, that we can't hear because everything's so blended together. And you would hear something in a raw stem and say, oh man, that's gotta be at the forefront of this. That'll really freak people out because they've never heard that part of it before. Or that was edited down, or they faded before that part came in.
It's funny. I wanted to add too that I think Tim and I were running parallel courses at that time because we were both feeling a little bit like we were. I think it was a little intimidating for both of us, for me to do the design elements and for Tim to do these music remixes, knowing what had preceded us in terms of Yes's catalog, Yes's history of recording, as well as Yes's history of visual representations of their music, specifically Roger Dean. And so we were both stepping into very, very big shoes. And I think, that being said, I think the work that we did at the time was great. I'm very proud of what we were able to accomplish at that time.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we've come to the end of the time we've got this time, but you must both come back on, as I said last time, Bob, and you have come back, which that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for sharing these stories about Yes. And it does sound like we could talk, the four of us, for many hours. As I say, thank you very much indeed to Bob and to Tim and also to Mark. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you, guys. I really appreciate being on.
Thanks, guys.